Hey guys, so today we're going to go ahead and talk about chapter 8.2, Energy and Life, and we're going to start that off by talking about photosynthesis. So if you remember from our chapter 2 where we talked about biochem, we talked about atoms, and we know that atoms can join together to basically make molecules. So this is an example of a molecule of water. We have 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. So a chemical formula basically tells us the kind of molecules and how many there are in a molecule. So we have H2O. We know we have hydrogen, we have oxygen. We specifically have the 2 hydrogen. Okay, so that's going to be important because you are expected to know the chemical formula for photosynthesis, or the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So synthesis, when you hear that, just means that we're building something. So you're taking these 2 things and you're making something out of it. So anytime you hear that, like protein synthesis, we're building proteins. Photosynthesis, we're building sugars, okay, using light, that photo meaning light. A chemical equation tells us what happens in a chemical reaction when molecules interact. So we know from chapter 2 that at the beginning of our equation are our reactants, at the end of it are our products. So here's the big picture and what you really need to know for your test and what you need to know for like your final is basically the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So our reactants, what we start off with is carbon dioxide and water. The way you can think about it is what we give plants, okay, we give them CO2 because we breathe it out. We have to water our plants to stay alive, and then we need to place them in sunlight. Okay, so then we think about what we give them. Okay, so, or not what we give them, what they give us. So we get sugar from them, we get food because we are heterotrophs, we can't make our own food, they're autotrophs. And then they also give us oxygen, we need that for cellular respiration. So this is what the chemical formula looks like. Carbon dioxide is CO2, specifically it's 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O, that water, plus sunlight makes our sugar C6H12O6, so specifically glucose, plus 6O2, our oxygen. So in addition to water and carbon dioxide, we have chlorophyll and light energy that are needed for photosynthesis to happen. So it's not necessarily in our equation, but that's why we put over the arrow the sunlight, or we put light. So photosynthesis involves a complex series of chemical reactions where one reaction is consumed by the next reaction. And when we have that, we call that basically a chemical pathway. So we have one reaction, or reaction 1 is product X. Then product X is reused as the reaction, or the reactants for the product Y. So this kind of series of events, like I said, we call a biochemical pathway. So again, this is what I would like you to actually put down into your notes, and this shows a biochemical pathway, so make sure this is drawn. So we start with our light-dependent reaction. There's 2 reactions here. In our light-dependent reaction, we obviously need sunlight, and we are going to need either our carbon dioxide or you need your water. In this one, we need specifically water. Okay, in the next one, we have our light-independent reaction. So those are 2 different types of reaction. We call that the Calvin cycle. So like I said before, in this reaction, the reactants are light and water. Our products are ATP, so our energy molecule, and our NADPH, so our electron carrier. We also produce oxygen, so that's one of the products that we see at the end of our actual formula for photosynthesis. Well, now that we've used water and we've used light, that means for the light-independent reaction, we need ATP and NADPH because that's what we stated before, but we need to then bring in carbon. So we use carbon dioxide, and you can think, okay, how do I remember this? Well, Calvin starts with a C, carbon starts with a C. That might be a way of remembering it. So we're fixing carbon in the Calvin cycle. So then our reactants, or our products for this then are basically what we have left. So in our equation, the only thing that's left that we haven't used so far is going to be our sugar molecule. So then there's your sugar molecule. So copy this down in your notes for the 8.2 video. So all of our reactants from our first, or our products from our first reaction are going to be used, or at least part of them, so the ATP and NADPH, in our next reaction. So photosynthesis reactants products. We use light energy, okay, to take CO2 plus H2O to fix it into sugar and oxygen. That just summarizes it. Well, in order to do all of that, we need the electromagnetic spectrum. We need light energy. Okay, so visible light is made up of many different wavelengths of light. Your eyes see the different sizes of those wavelengths as different colors, okay? So a myth about plants is that many people think that plants are green because they absorb and use green light in photosynthesis, but that's not actually true. We actually see what's reflected back to our eyes. So the light wavelengths that are reflected off objects bounce back to our eyes, and that's actually, again, what we see. So the main energy absorbing molecule in green plants is chlorophyll. Okay, so it's a little pigment found in our chloroplasts. Carotenoids are plant pigments as well. So all basically plants contain carotenoids and chlorophyll, but in green plants they're predominantly chlorophyll. In a lot of carotenoids they're going to look yellow, orange, and red. So green leaves have both chlorophyll and carotenoids, like I said, all the time, but the huge amount of chlorophyll kind of hides those other colors. Now in the fall, chlorophyll production slows as trees start to shut down and photosynthesis stops. So that's why we start seeing the different colors in our leaves. So we see the carotenoids, they're not hidden anymore by the chlorophyll. So there are two types of chlorophyll that we talk about. We have chlorophyll A and we have chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A is found predominantly in photosynthetic plants, and chlorophyll, it's going to absorb, so we see that in the blue line on our graph, it's going to absorb red and violet wavelengths best. So it's going to use the energy from the red and violet wavelengths, and it's going to reflect the green wavelengths, and so that's why we're seeing these plants as green. It absorbs very little. You can see green wavelengths like we said before, or blue. So blue and green. So we don't see plants, so we see a mixture of that green and blue. Chlorophyll B is found basically in our photosynthetic bacteria. So it absorbs some red wavelengths of light and even more blue-violet wavelengths of light. Okay, but it reflects back to us those greenish colors again, so that's why we see them as green. Neither kinds of chlorophyll is really good at absorbing, like we said, the green light, and you can see that there in this diagram. That's why leaves look green. Chlorophyll doesn't absorb, it reflects green light. That's why plants have other pigments like carotenoids. They actually help absorb some wavelengths that chlorophyll doesn't absorb. So chlorophyll obviously doesn't absorb the green. However, carotenoids absorb green, and they can use then pretty much the whole spectrum of light or the sun's energy. So what wavelengths are best for photosynthesis? The ones chlorophyll A absorbs the best, and that's going to be red and blue-violet. So because light is a form of energy, any molecule that absorbs light absorbs the energy from that light. So basically the chlorophyll or the pigments that absorb the light are going to basically absorb the energy. So energy and electrons. When chlorophyll absorbs light, the energy is transferred to electrons in chlorophyll molecule. So we have high energy electrons make photosynthesis work. So they actually, this is where it all starts. So when light hits these electrons, they get super excited, and the energy from the electrons allow the whole reaction to actually take its place. So if you remember from cell bio, enzymes for photosynthesis are in the chloroplast, and you have to understand what the chloroplast is made up of. So it's made up of a couple different things. The first part of the chloroplast is the thylakoids. Those are those sac-like sprees that we talked about in our last chapter. And those basically are the photosynthetic membranes. They can contain our pigments. We then have our granum. Our granum is the stack, the whole stack. So the thylakoids are the little individual spree-like molecules. The granum are the stacks of them. We then have the gel-filled space, and that gel-filled space is going to be for inside the thylakoids is going to be the thylakoid space, and then outside is going to be our stroma, okay? And so the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. And then outside of the chloroplast, again, you should know this from last chapter, is our cytoplasm. So proteins that are part of the thylakoid membrane organize light-absorbing pigments into clusters called photosystems. And we're going to talk more about photosystems in our next chapter, or next section, chapter 8.3. This is all for your notes. What I really want you to know is basically the biosynthesis pathway. So that the reactants or the products for the first reaction, the light-independent reaction, are needed as the reactants for the second reaction. So make sure you have that jotted down in your notes, and I hope this kind of helped you understand more of how photosynthesis works. We'll get more into the specifics in our next video.